Hello, History 72A Winter Quarter 2024. I left off about halfway through Lecture 18 of Section T, so this will be the second half of Lecture 18. Just as a reminder, in the first half, we looked at the Boston Tea Party, and we left off with the representations of women, idealized upper class women, as supposedly obligate nurturers in the new idea of the Enlightenment. Of course, not all women were upper class. So if women were so strongly impelled to nurture first and foremost, and preferably exclusively, if women were designed for nurture in every aspect of their being, every fiber of their body, and inclination of their mind, that is what they would do without outside encouragement needed. Part of that outside encouragement came, as we have been seeing, in the representation of the impossible ideal of good women. But there was a flip side to this, the representation of the bad woman, or the woman gone astray, and her inevitable punishment by the universe. A fallen woman was fit only for prostitution, with the attendant dangers of a marginal existence without legal or social protection. In conduct literature, meaning writings that told people how they were meant to conduct themselves or behave, including moralistic novels, the choices were not great for women who were seduced, even if it involved drugs and rape. Pamela's Virtue. Pamela is the name of a book, Pamela or Virtue Rewarded. Pamela's virtue lay in repeatedly rejecting the advances of her master before being raped by him in the bed shared by his maid servants when he disguised himself as a maid. The reward for Pamela's virtue is that she got to marry her rapist. Pamela at least got to live. Clarissa, in another novel, Clarissa or the History of a Young Lady, Clarissa, kidnapped by a man whose advances she rejected, is taken to a brothel, drugged against her will, and raped. Her shame is so great that she does the honorable thing, rejects his offer of marriage, and dies a slow, painful death from grief and self-imposed starvation. This sort of representation of what could happen to virtuous women sullied by sexual intercourse made the abuse of sex workers socially permissible, as these so-called unnatural women chose to have intercourse and even seemingly enjoyed it to please clients. This image, this engraving, is a brothel scene made in the 18th century. There is a lot to analyze here, but I want to draw your attention to two things. One is the presence of the Black woman in the upper left corner. I brought this up in the discussion of the consolidation of enslavement in Virginia. Enslaved Black women did not legally possess their own bodies, so raping an enslaved woman was not a crime unless it was a crime against her enslaver for property damage. To excuse this, Europeans in the colonies and in Europe created the stereotype that Black women were particularly lascivious, so they could not be raped legally or morally. Her presence in this image was used as a symbol to indicate that all of these women failed at passionlessness, meaning they were all unnatural. Sex workers could not legally or morally be mistreated because they brought the treatment on themselves by not being virtuous women as nature had intended. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to in the 18th century images of sex workers is the association of dissipation with alcohol consumption. The normalization of this association is still strong enough that sometimes it takes a little work to see this as being socially produced and not a natural association. We've already seen the association of sexual pleasure in women with the construction of sex gender. Natural women from the Enlightenment on were passionless. And we have seen the construction of not really women intersected with race. The consumption of alcohol was part of the construction of class. Wealthy people certainly consumed alcohol, and in reality, some of them consumed alcohol to the point of falling down drunk. But the 18th century construction of class put lower class, alcohol, and drunkenness, as well as women not counting as women in terms of social treatment, into one bin, and upper class, sophistication, virtuous women, and exotic non-alcoholic beverages into another bin. And those exotic non-alcoholic beverages bring us back to tea. But before we go to tea, a couple of comments. One, you can see wines written here on the brothel. So that one's pretty straightforward. In this one, she's holding a liquor bottle here, and you can see glasses here. It might not be as obvious, but what this woman is drinking is punch out of a bowl. And punch was a little bit like a cocktail now, but made in large quantity and always drunk out of bowls. By the 19th century, the 1800s, tea with sugar would become the inexpensive beverage of the solid British working class. But in the first half of the 18th century, the 1700s, both tea and sugar were expensive and exotic. Drinking tea was associated with good manners and civility, especially if it was done with all of the proper accoutrements. This tea chest that you're looking at on the slide belonged to Alexander Hamilton. It was made in China to Hamilton's specifications. The artistry exhibited is considerable in technique, aesthetic, and materials. The gold is real, and the lacquer was true lacquer, not cheap European imitation. When opened, a high-end tea chest like this would have canisters for different teas, green tea, Indian tea, China tea, and so on, and for sugar. I don't know how well you can see it here, but the decoration is here on the chest is a more sophisticated version of the chinoiserie seen on the tea set earlier in the lecture. Supposedly Chinese motifs, often created in China in the 18th century, but designed to fit Western expectations rather than actual Chinese aesthetics. Because tea and sugar were precious, tea chests in the 18th century were generally locked boxes. And you can see the place to insert the key here on Hamilton's chest. The last part of Hamilton's tea chest that signaled taste, civility, and membership in the upper class is the Hamilton family crest on the top here. The Hamilton family came from Scotland, and they were not aristocratic. Like other drafters of the Declaration and the Constitution, particularly those with plantations in the Chesapeake region, Hamilton's family crest was created in North America. Washington and Jefferson had crests created and commissioned tableware from England with those crests to bolster their membership claims in the forming English colonial aristocracy of North America. If tea marked civility, wealth, and high status, then drinking tea must confer power and prestige, right? The answer is either yes and no, or sorta. Tea became associated with wealth in the 1700s, but also with the private sphere of the home. The members of this family are all wearing casual at-home clothing. This is probably easiest to point out with the man. He is not wearing a wig, and you can see that his hair is shorn quite close. There's nothing showing underneath. Instead of his wig, he has what is called a nightcap, although it could be worn at home at any time of day or night. The father is relaxing in the nurturing environment of the home created and maintained by his wife and their servants, who are literally out of the picture. He will head out into the hoi polloi of the public sphere with his wig on, refreshed by ministrations of his devoted wife, who will see to the maintenance of calm domesticity while he is away. Gentlemen drank tea, but tea was a lady's drink. Here we have the whole virtuous woman package in this image. Tea, child, placid look, beautiful clothing, and tea accoutrement, all safely contained within the private domestic sphere. A refuge for men, the natural habitat for women. When men went into the public sphere to discuss important things like politics and revolution with one another, they went to a coffee house. The coffee house was a distinctly male-only space. Women were permitted to serve, as in taverns, but entry by other women would leave those women vulnerable as strumpets, lacking virtue, meaning that women who entered risked violence, including sexual violence. The coffee house implied sophistication, education, and civility in men, whereas the tavern was lowbrow or common. But taverns and coffee houses were both damaging to the reputation of women, something that may sound trivial now, but could have catastrophic consequences for women at the time. Think of poor Pamela. You can see that these men are educated, informed, and sophisticated because they are reading and discussing newspapers while they are drinking coffee. There's coffee being poured there. He's drinking coffee there, and they all have their wigs on, no at-home hats. And they are smoking tobacco in long clay pipes. There's one sitting down there on the table, and there's a man holding his pipe and smoking there. This system had the potential to keep women isolated, each in their own private sphere, except that is not how things went in either Britain or the British colonies in North America. Women could join one another in their different private spheres, which they did. When viewed kindly, meaning when the women behaved in properly withdrawn womanly ways and didn't cause problems, the ladies' tea party could be a symbol of gentility and good manners. I love the expression on especially the faces of these two here. If you ever wonder where the phrase highbrow comes from, that's pretty much an image definition. But women, being human and not actually ruled by a burning desire to cuddle their clean, perfect, happy children at all times, got together in one another's homes while the nurse cared for the children, and they discussed things like politics, current events, revolution, and newspapers. These were upper-class women. Remember, tea and sugar were precious. They are the last group of human females that might have even a chance of counting as actual virtuous women. But women were defined by nature in the Enlightenment construction of sex gender as not just nurturing, but frivolous and silly. Men discussed, women gossiped. In this image, the people behaving oddly on the left here in the background symbolize the emotions that women just cannot control, like jealousy and vanity, emotions that men don't seem to have. Although you will notice the men on the right here peering in the window to see what the women are up to. A quick refresher, the Boston Tea Party, 1773. Vandalism and destruction of property done at night by men, many of whom disguised themselves as Native Americans. This was serious, if annoying, political and mercantile protests. In 1774, 51 women, led by this person, Penelope Barker, same woman in both paintings. You could get an idea of the difference in quality and style of the paintings. These women met in Edenton, North Carolina, where they composed and signed a document resolving to boycott British tea and cloth, these beautiful, beautiful textiles. The document was to be sent to Britain, quote, to give memorable proof of patriotism as a duty that we owe, not only to our near and dear connections, but to ourselves. these women actually thought of themselves as people. I know. When gathering signers, Barker reportedly wrote that the aim was to, again quote, let our voices be heard. We are signing our names to a document, not hiding ourselves behind costumes like the men in Boston did at their tea party. The British will know who we are. This openly boycotting without damage to property or midnight subterfuge was not serious political commentary. In the colonies, the sweet dears were trying to do their part, bless them. In England, responses ranged from the comment, quote, the only security on our side is the probability that there are but few places in America which possess so much female artillery as Edenton, to what is now a famous satirical cartoon seen on this slide. Known as the Society of Patriotic Ladies, this print appeared in newspapers, lampooning or making fun of the signers of the Edenton Declaration. Granted, this was published in Great Britain in an era of biting satirical prints. It is not the existence of critique and satire that makes this image important to us in this class, but the way that critique is made. Let's take it apart using the Enlightenment construction of sex gender along with, and this is important, the Enlightenment constructions of race and class. We will look for the symbolism that we have been learning about over the course of this lecture that links co-constructed categories of race, class, and sex gender, using each one to reinforce the hierarchical status of the others. We will start at the left side here, and I will enlarge these, and circle around to the woman with her back to us and leaning over to sign the declaration. These women are emptying out tea caddies. You know what they look like now from Hamilton's tea chest. But this is presented as a pale and pathetic imitation of the actions of the men in the Boston Tea Party. These women are drinking punch from a large bowl. Punch was made with alcohol, and they are presumably drinking quite a bit of it. This uses tropes of low-class, drunken, and sexually dissolute, slatternly women. This woman is dressed as a member of the elite class, but she is both silly and unvirtuous. She means to be signing the declaration, but is easily distracted by the compliments and potential for snogging the dashing military officer. The Black woman shown here is not used to represent reality or diversity, but to link race and sex in a way that symbolizes lack of judgment and sense among all of the women present, who appear to have no concern for their own reputations. You might think back to the 1664 Maryland law and the wording, some English women having forgotten themselves. The trio of women close to her here all look objectionably masculine to the audience of the time, particularly the women holding the gavel and either in charge or trying ineffectually to keep order. The dog, rather than being an indication of fidelity and love, is urinating on a tea canister and one woman's skirt. The dog is licking a child who sits completely unattended and uncared for on the dirty floor. The child is positioned low center next to the declaration the women are signing or not signing because they are too silly. This is probably the most powerful critique in the image in terms of Enlightenment symbology. These women are so very unnatural that they don't even notice, much less nurture and care for appropriately, a small child. The women are doing everything except the one thing that they were created by nature to do. The position of the one woman actually engaged with the declaration, bent over with her back to the viewer, was meant to be insulting. The words on the declaration she is signing are a parody of the actual Edenton Declaration. The paper reads, We, the ladies of Edmonton, rather than Edenton, do hereby solemnly engage not to conform to that pernicious custom of drinking tea, or that we, the aforesaid ladies, will not promote the ware of manufacture from England until such time that all acts which tend to enslave this our native country shall be repealed. So once again, that's a parody. That's not the actual wording of the Edenton Declaration. These on the slide, the one we've just been talking about, and to the left, the one here of Thomas Paine, are both British satirical prints mocking the lead up to the American Revolution. The one on the left is Thomas Paine ready to defend liberty with manly weapons as well as with words. The symbolism used in the two is not only different, but different in ways that reinforce constructions of gender sex as well as race and class. Paine may be misguided, but he is an educated man. The signers of the Edmonton Declaration are ridiculous because they are women who have tried to enter the public sphere, the domain of men. In this lecture, we looked at the social aspect of the historical context in which this document here, with this clause here, was written by this group of individuals, all of whom look pretty much like one another. This document is, of course, the Declaration of Independence, and the clause that I've highlighted is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and take them seriously when they say men, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We got an idea for the cultural tropes and reinforcements that naturalized the exclusion of women and the way that they employed and simultaneously reinforced hierarchical constructions of race and class as well, making a group which quite deliberately did not include women, as well as did not include anyone non-white, and did not include white men without property, seemed perfectly unobjectionable, quite reasonable actually to these men. What else could they do? This is an overtly political document and self-consciously referenced structures of power. This John Trumbull painting that you're looking at is ubiquitous. My favorite part is the line of pretty much identical wigs extending to the vanishing point. Some people quibble that this depicts the submission of a draft of the Declaration for approval rather than the actual signing of the Declaration. For our purposes in this class, that is completely irrelevant. It was the same group making decisions in both instances. Next time, we will look at the way that the budding natural sciences of the Enlightenment appeared to prove the characterizations that justified not including most people in the North American British colonies in this supposedly unanimous declaration. I will also point out before we leave this image, the homespun suit here and here. Key points for Lecture 18. The 18th century, 1700s, construction of sex gender in Europe and the European colonies maintained the hierarchies of power seen in earlier periods, but updated the reasons that such hierarchies were inevitable to suit Enlightenment ideas and language. Intentionally and or not, Enlightenment art and elite cultural practices both relied on and reinforced the construction of womanhood as naturally centered on nurture and babies. This excluded most women from the group woman, ostensibly because they failed to show proper natural mothering behavior. Because women were designed by nature in the perfect form to make and nurture babies, the actions and words of upper-class women were automatically excluded from serious consideration. Even an educated woman could not have rational, complex thought. Therefore, women who demonstrated rational, complex thought were not proper virtuous women. This, in turn, proving that women were incapable of rational, complex thought. Go with that one. Sex, gender, race, and class were co-constructed during the Enlightenment, as indeed they are now. The dilemma. As an historian, I am perfectly aware of the way that material culture is used to reinforce and naturalize hierarchies of power. As a person living in the world, I absolutely love items created by people, both for their intrinsic aesthetic quality as well as for all of the historical information that they hold. Which is to say that the coda to this lecture will be a series of 18th century accoutrements for tea. The teapot here that you are looking at was made between 1671 and 1708 in the Netherlands. The wealthy merchant class in the Netherlands imported and began to build cultural structures around tea quite early. Tea had to be imported because it won't grow in the climates of Europe, but teapots could be imitated. This one is made to look like imported redware teapots made initially in China. This incredibly elaborate tea caddy has canisters made of silver. Demand for all of the things used to serve tea in a way that demonstrated gentility and taste created new forms of imagery and kept many an artisan and craftsperson employed. This caddy was made in London. The views here on the canisters that I've enlarged around are of colonial ports and plantations. They are meant, in the words of a museum curator, to extol the exoticism of tea while ignoring the exploitation that devastated these sites. These are all tea canisters. They go from earliest to latest, starting with the upper left and circling around clockwise. Most of these were made to fit with others in a caddy. You could tell by the flattened sides. A few of them were made to stand on their own on a table or shelf. And you can see this one tells you that it has green tea in it. This is a tea table made, as the name suggests, specifically for serving tea. Interestingly, the legs of the table are, well, legs. The tea set on the table has all of the regular pieces: teapot, tea tray, sugar bowl, cream pitcher, slop bowl, saucers, and tea bowls. Notice that the tea bowls don't have handles, not cups as we think of them now. The sugar tongs are these things here. I know they're a little bit difficult to see. This is a closer view of sugar tongs, along with tea strainer and teaspoons. And you can see there's a crest on the teaspoons. Finally, there would be a tea urn for holding and dispensing hot water. Now that you know what everything is, I am just going to show you a variety of tea items. Tune out whenever you get bored. This is like your virtual museum. This teapot is made of silver. The handle is of ebony, a particularly dark, highly prized wood. This was made in 1700. This is a tea service made of hard paste porcelain in 1720. These, of course, are teapots, painted porcelain on the left and soft paste porcelain and brass on the right. They both date to the 1740s. This is a tea kettle and a burner to keep the kettle warm. This is made of hard paste porcelain and gilt gold in 1780. This is a lockable tea caddy with tea canisters, one for green and one for black tea, and a sugar box. This is actually the sugar box here, and the tea canisters there and there. These are made of painted enamel and copper and date to around 1770. This is a tea bowl and saucer made of salt glazed stoneware in 1745. Teacup and saucer painted porcelain 1760s. Assorted tea trays. Teapot, both sides porcelain 1725. This one quite literally links women and tea in its decoration. Assorted 18th century teacups. One has a handle here and their accompanying saucers. Mid 18th century teapots. tea caddy, tea canisters, sugar bowl, 1790s. By this time, tea and sugar are common enough that the box does not lock. And finally, if you are still with me, a political teapot made in British North America between 1766 and 1770. America, liberty restored.